turn it back over to you.
Okay, well, thanks again. So this time I'd like to talk a little bit about another a product of the hubs, and that's the Adaptation Resources for Agriculture Workbook. And also I'm going to focus more on the case studies that have been put together on actual application of the workbook to real farms. And the workbook authors, the primary authors were Maria Janovic from the Forest Service and Dan Dosty from NRCS. Actually, Dan did that while he was on his detail, or while he was liaison, to the Northeast Climate Hub a couple of years ago. And then they were supported by other leaders from NRCS and the Climate Hubs. And this is a joint product of the Midwest, Northeast, and Northern Forest Climate Hubs. Next slide, please. So many of you maybe have seen the workbook already, so I'm just going to briefly say a little bit about it and spend more time on the case studies. But, well, one, the workbook is available on the Hub website. If you're interested, you can download the whole thing. But there's the bullets here lay out the 5 chapters in the book. So there's some review material, some examples and explanations of the adaptation strategies, but chapter 4 is really the meat of the workbook, because it's a step-by-step farm planning process. And so kind of the steps in that are defining the management goals, assess what the site-specific climate change impacts are for your individual farm, then to evaluate those objectives given what the individual climate variability or vulnerabilities are for the farm. Then you identify approaches, and then you come up with a system to monitor the effectiveness of those approaches. And then it gives some examples. Next slide, please. And so, as I said, there's been several case studies that have been developed by NRCS and Hub staff that have worked with a fairly wide range of farms at several different places across the country. And those are posted on the Hub website. Link is down at the bottom there, but you can easily find them on the Hub website. And also along with this, Hub staff have been working to do some training for NRCS field staff to be able to help their customers utilize the workbook. Next slide, please. And here's a list. I won't go into all of them in detail, but these are the case studies that are currently completed and available on the website. You can see that there's a pretty wide range of farms there, ranging from a small orchard in Wisconsin down to a couple of pretty large farms out on the Central Plains. And so I'm actually, the last one is the one that I'm going to talk about today. Next slide, please. Yeah, and that case study is from the Pope Hillside Farm in central Oklahoma. It's in Loyal, Oklahoma. Steve and Clay Pope are the farmers, and actually Clay works with the Southern Plains Climate Hub. And while I was there for a few months last year as acting director, I got to know Clay and visit his farm. So I thought this would be a good one to use as an example, since I've been there. But they're in a fairly dry area where they get about 34 inches of rain. They have about 3,000 acres, and their main crop there is dual purpose wheat. It's all dry land. And by dual purpose, I mean that they graze their winter wheat from October through about March. And on their farm, they're bringing in some stocker cattle, but they're also feeding they're grazing their own cows from the cow-calf operation. They started no-tilling back in the early 2000s, and then in 2013, they began using some cover crops, primarily, in their case, summer cover crops. After the June or July harvest, of their wheat until planting of the winter wheat in the fall. Next slide, please. And so part of the process of going through the workbook process is the farmers, one of the things they do is they assess their natural resource concerns in their region. So there, the Popes felt that water erosion, soil compaction, conserving soil moisture, and brush and weed control on the grassland portions of their farms were the most important resource concerns. And then the project or outline also goes to have them look at some of the observations that they're seeing about climate change in the region. Well, they're observing that spring rains seem to be coming later, fall rains seem to be coming a little earlier, which kind of messes up your cycle for winter wheat. But they're also seeing increased rainfall intensities, and with that, they're seeing increased challenges for controlling erosion and also more soil crusting, especially when folks are doing tillage before their wheat is planted. Next slide, please. Okay, so I'll go quick. So the program in the workbook, has people outline first their objectives. So, they're looking at objectives like increasing residue levels, keeping more roots in the soil, having diverse rotations that they can graze, and using more mixed species of cover crops. Next, please. No, yeah, next. There we go. And then you evaluate your objectives. Well, they're seeing challenges like, can we effectively control weeds and fertility management with using less inputs? And can they get enough rainfall to get a cover crop established in the middle of the summer in Oklahoma after they harvest their wheat? But there are opportunities they're seeing, such as reduced inputs and better soil water holding capacity, as well as more grazing opportunities. Next slide. They then identified approaches such as planting a wider variety of commodity crops, so they have a wider window for cover crop usage. Benefit of that is more flexibility. Downside is it makes management harder. They're putting grazing, yeah, you get the benefits of the manure, but you have maybe more infrastructure and labor. And then keeping soil covered is another approach. Again, benefiting from soil carbon there, but timing of getting those cover crops planted is really critical. Next slide. I think I'm really close. Okay, and this is my last one here. So, and then part of that is you've got those approaches. You need to monitor them, and their main tool that they outlined in the case study was that they'll track the economics, look at input costs, look at revenues, and along with that, they're going to monitor their crop yields from year to year and see how they're doing there. With that, I'll finish. Thanks.
Thank you, Kurt. And we will pause there to make sure you have Kurt's contact information if you would like to obtain a copy of that adaptation workbook. It's a great resource, and they also have a great website to help support that workbook. So check that out. And then I'm up to bat, and I will turn my timer on so that I'm holding myself accountable too. Kate, if you'll go ahead and get us ready for our next slide. So Kurt has shared one of our Climate Hub's kind of co-developed tools, that adaptation workbook, and I wanted to share another co-developed tool that the Climate Hubs have worked really closely with. A lot of our partners, ARS and NRCS in particular, have been really big contributors and supporters, along with our extension partners and our conservation district partners on this next tool. And so I'm not telling you the name of it, it's a big secret. Here's the motivation for this next tool that I'm going to tell you about. You know, as a Climate Hub director, I really strive to find ways to make weather and climate information more usable for agriculture. And so in the past, we would go out and talk with ranchers and carry with us our this seasonal precipitation outlook for the summer from our friends at NOAA. And ranchers, you know, would say, great, thank you for this, but what does this really mean for me as a rancher or a range manager? And in the past, I didn't have a great answer for them. You know, I was kind of hoping you would know how to translate precipitation into the things you care about. And we realized that really wasn't very fair of us to ask ranchers and range managers to do that translation themselves. And so, Kate, if you hit the next button for me, I will make the big reveal. So we decided there was an unmet need among our rangeland managers that instead of asking them to translate the precipitation outlook into the things they care about, we could take one more step for them and created a product called GrassCast. And that stands for the Grassland Productivity Forecast. So instead of giving them a precipitation outlook, now we can give them a grassland or a rangeland forecast directly. Next. And so, welcome to GrassCast. The map that you're looking at we'll give an example of here in just a minute, but just generally what GrassCast is doing, it's taking the observed weather up to the date that the map was made, combining it with information about what we think might happen over the rest of the growing season, so some information from those seasonal weather forecasts. And if you click next for me, Kate, putting those two pieces together to try and provide some estimate for you about what we expect grassland productivity in your area to be during the upcoming growing season. And click next for me, Kate. Sorry for all the animation. And we express that grassland productivity as some percent higher or lower than your local area's long-term average. So that's the overview of GrassCast. If we go to the next slide, we'll dig in a little deeper as an example. So at first we did carry out that single map you were just looking at, and we carried it out to our friends at NRCS and FSA, our conservation districts and extension, and the very first thing they told us was, please don't make us trust a single map, a single forecast. We know forecasts are difficult in the Great Plains region, especially in the summertime and especially for precip. So instead of asking us to trust a single map, could you please give us 3 scenarios? And then let us decide which scenario we think is most likely in our area. And so instead of a single map, we created 3 maps, and they represent 3 possibilities. What is precipitation over the course of the summer growing season on your rangelands? What if that precip is above normal? What does your map, the GrassCast map, look like? What if it's just near normal? How differently would the map look then? And finally, worst comes to worst, what if it's below normal precip? Then tell me what your GrassCast map would look like in that scenario. Next slide. And this is how the 3 map product was born. And I just wanted to walk quickly through one example so that you know how to use these 3-paneled maps. I've circled an area in southeast Colorado that interests me. You could pick a different location, but choose that same location in each map. And Kate, if you'll give me a click, go ahead and click 3 times. You'll get 3 drop-down windows. And so find your location and check the color of that location. For my location, starting over on the left, under the above normal precipitation scenario, my area of interest is in green. And that tells me if my area gets above normal precipitation from April 28th, that was the date this particular map was made, through the end of the growing season, August 31st, that this area would expect to have green, which represents near normal amounts of rangeland forage pounds per acre. But what if we're wrong? What if the precipitation over the rest of the growing season is just near normal? That's the middle map, and my area is yellow, indicating that near normal precipitation is likely to generate below normal amounts of rangeland production, about 5 to 15% less pounds per acre. And finally, if the spigot turns off for the rest of the growing season and precipitation is below normal, that's the far right map, my area is red. If precipitation is below normal for the rest of the growing season, this area should expect to have 30% less pounds per acre than they normally have, or worse. Next slide. This map gets updated every 2 weeks throughout the entire growing season, and so this is the most current GrassCast map. I'm not going to spend a lot of time on it. I just wanted to highlight that the maps evolve as the season unfolds and as we learn how the actual precipitation has occurred, and we're guessing less and less of the remaining growing season. Hint, things in the central plains and southern plains are getting a little bit hairy, as many of you probably know. Lots of oranges and reds, even if for the rest of the growing season we have above normal precip. So I hope people are thinking about their drought contingency plans. Next slide. Check it out at our GrassCast webpage, which is hosted by the National Drought Mitigation Center. We do also have maps this summer for the southwest states of New Mexico and Arizona. I didn't get to show those today, but we do have them, so go check it out on the website. Next case. You can also search more closely for your location and really zoom in and get down to a 6 mile by 6 mile area and check the more specific percent forecasts for your area, again, on the website. Next. I am out of time, and so we're going to zip through these. Lots of resources on the GrassCast website, including a really nice, fun introductory video and some tutorials. If I went too quickly today, you can check out the tutorials that will walk you through how to correctly interpret the GrassCast maps for your area. Next. I'm cutting into our discussion time here, so we'll flash through these next 2 slides fairly quickly. Go ahead, Kate. Thank you. Emily mentioned earlier the AgRisk Viewer on that previous slide. There's the website at the bottom there to check out the AgRisk Viewer. It is a really cool tool for visualizing historically what have been the insured losses to different types of natural disasters or extreme weather events. So I encourage you to go check out the AgRisk Viewer from the Southwest Climate Hub, which was in collaboration with a risk management agency. And this is a really neat tool from one of our extension partners in my region called Scenario Planning. And again, if you go to the website in that bottom right corner, it's this really fun interactive cartoon of a farm where you can choose what season you're concerned about, what weather conditions. So maybe you're concerned about a hot, dry summer. You can choose that scenario and then click on the different icons around the farm to learn about what are the unique challenges in that situation and what are some resources to help you deal with those challenges. So I just love this as an outreach tool. Next. And Dennis already mentioned this, but they do have his quarterly outlook, a Climate Hub update from the Midwest Climate Hub. So I just wanted to highlight that one more time as another useful resource to kind of keep in touch with how things are going and what we're seeing out there related to climate and ag. And that's it for me. And so with our final 12 minutes, we wanted to get some feedback and input from you all. So we're finished with our discussions. We've covered a lot of ground. If you have any specific questions about what we've covered, continue to put those in the Q&A. But I want to get you all thinking about extreme weather and climate change from your point of view, from where you stand as you're looking around your agricultural or forested landscapes. My first question that I want you to think about for us is what weather or climate-related challenges are farmers, ranchers, or foresters struggling with in your area? What do you hear them talking about? And so you can, I think for this question, you can go ahead and put your answers in the Q&A. We won't actually treat them as, we'll treat them as answers, not questions, but we would love to collect your thoughts kind of maybe in your answers in the Q&A. You can tell me generally where you are, if you're willing to share your general location, followed by, again, what weather-related or climate-related challenges are producers in your area chatting about? I'm going to pause there. If you can't get Q&A to work, you're welcome to try the chat box. I think hand in hand with this question about, what weather or climate-related challenges are folks struggling with, sometimes instead of, a different way to ask that same question is, more broadly, what changes are people noticing in your landscape? What's different? Whether it's just different this year because of specific weather conditions. So what challenges or changes are you noticing, or the stakeholders you work with noticing?
Now, while people are thinking about this and typing in where they're located and what they're noticing, or any questions that they have for any of us, for any of our presentations, I wonder if we should also just briefly answer the international question in the chat box.
That would be great, Emily. So we do have some answers rolling in, but let's address the question earlier. Are there any international collaborations or international participation in the Climate Hub? Would you like to start, Emily?
Absolutely, yes. So when we first started 6 years ago, a delegation from Mexico came because they were looking to establish climate hubs in Mexico as well. And so we partnered with them and discussed how the climate hubs were established, and both the Southwest Climate Hub and the California Climate Hub hosted a delegation to talk about climate hubs in Mexico. One of our hub directors, Steve Estoya, spent some time in Tunisia. They're working on water and climate-related projects as well. So that was at the request of the Tunisian government, I believe, that Steve Estoya went and did that. And then most recently, Danelle and I provided information for a G20 virtual meeting on promoting sustainable agricultural development in drylands. And that meeting's coming up, but we certainly provided our Climate Hub perspective to inform those discussions in the G20 meeting.
And also, I looked at the Northeast Hub. It's been a couple years ago now, but we've had cross-border workshop with the Canadians, so we're kind of the opposite neighbors. But we've worked with the Canadians in the Northeast.
And we've had some ongoing conversations from the Northern Plains and Midwest too, with the Canadians, because of the very close issues, especially with the Canadians and the Northern Plains.
Yep, we would really love to take GrassCast up into Alberta and Saskatchewan, and we actually were able to partner with AgriFood Canada and get some data so that behind the scenes we are starting to work on GrassCast. So maybe in a year or two we might be able to extend that forecast up north into the northern prairies. So we've got one response.
Sorry, Danelle. Oh, one last example is that hub directors are also authors and review the International Panel on Climate Change reports that come out. So that's another way we work internationally with other climate scientists. Now I'm done.
Excellent. I'm so glad you mentioned that one, Emily. That's such an important resource for people that want to learn more, is our IPCC report. So thank you. All right, so we've got some of our first responses coming in about what weather-related challenges or changes are people noticing. And the first one that was mentioned is drought in the Willamette Valley of Oregon. And I lived in the Willamette Valley for 4 years while I was working on my PhD. And it is, it's astounding to think about drought in that normally very moist environment. So that's an interesting one. It's interesting when drought occurs in places that are maybe not as accustomed to coping with it. That can be a really big challenge. And I see a comment here coming in from South Central Alaska. So a soil conservationist for NRCS in South Central Alaska wants to share a few examples with us. Precipitation being inconsistent. They were very drought-stricken in 2019, and then this year, 2020, they're very wet. So kind of seeing more and more of the extreme ends of the precipitation spectrum. And I think a lot of regions are feeling that same way. They note that this makes it really difficult to plan for crops in south central Alaska, and also issues with the spruce bark beetle, an outbreak there that's resulting in vast dead forest and extreme fire behavior. And so we know that very high winter temperatures are making it possible for various bark beetle species, most of which are actually native to the area, but the change in the climate is making their behavior a bit different. And so some really interesting observations coming out of south central Alaska. It sounds like they're trying to increase their outreach and education to the crop producers there, trying to help boost their soil health and implement more soil health practices, which, yes, we learned today, and we all know from a lot of other experiences that soil health can help bolster resilience to these types of changes. So extreme drought and extreme wet. Our soil health conservation practices can really help buffer against those extremes.
And now we should probably mention our Northwest Climate Hub is ramping up some of their interactions with Alaska and would be a partner for them if they want to have further conversations.
Yeah, that's an excellent point, Dennis. Actually, my former Climate Hub fellow, Haley Wilmer, is now stationed up in Juneau with the Forest Service and in part with the Northwest Climate Hub. So they are increasing the capacity of the climate hubs in Alaska. If you're interested in partnering, be sure to reach out to that Northwest Climate Hub.
And there's also a former Midwest coordinator is in Anchorage now also. So
excellent. So the capacity in Alaska as a whole has just expanded. So as we're waiting for other folks to kind of share what changes they're noticing, I'm going to turn it around and ask the panel to share what are the big changes that people in your regions are talking about and expressing concern about? Go ahead, Emily.
Okay, I was waiting for one of my other colleagues to start first, but I'll go ahead. What we're seeing in the Southwest is we're often, thought of as the hottest and driest region of the country, but our droughts seem to be more extreme and longer. For example, the 2018 exceptional drought over the Colorado Plateau, that leading to some major wildfires, and then the resulting debris flows and intense precipitation on those wildfire burn scars. So that's one thing that we're seeing. We're also thinking a lot more about extreme heat and those extreme heat events and the effects of those on people, agricultural workers, and other people that happen to be a vulnerable population. So I would say drought and extreme heat and changes in extreme precipitation for the Southwest.
Great. Thank you, Emily, from the Southwest perspective. We have just 2 minutes left. I want to share very quickly some input we received from Southwest Oklahoma, and then I'll turn it back over to Dennis for some closing thoughts. But in Southwest Oklahoma, drought conditions, but also spring rains that are arriving later and fall rains that are arriving earlier. So it sounds like it's kind of squishing their growing season or their ability to be out in the fields. So also it looks like they're changing crops, shifting from cotton towards wheat due to a pest, the boll weevil, and some new weather and climate related challenges related to the boll weevil. Cotton's trying to make a slow comeback, they say, but it sounds like they have some pest related challenges. So keep those observations pouring in while Dennis is sharing our closing thoughts. I'm always so interested to hear what people are experiencing and struggling with, and how the climate hubs might be able to help with information or tools or more importantly, partnerships. Dennis, we've got 1 minute, 2 minutes left.
Great. And what Danelle said is right on, that we do love to partner. We do love to hear needs and want to work with those needs to try to address them wherever they are in the agricultural community, to do the best that we can. So if there are ever any other questions, comments, or ideas that you have for additional things, we, whatever hub covers your area, we would love to hear from you to be able to interact further and sort out how we can deal with some of these issues. So with that, I'd like to thank all of the other panelists. Excellent job, everyone. Thank you very much. And thank you for folks for attending and your interaction and comments. And we hope to interact with you further at another time along the way. Thanks for coming. Have a great rest of the conference.
Emily, there's a comment that came in through the Q&A just complimenting you on the excellent AgRisk Viewer. The participant really enjoys the AgRisk Viewer, and that they hope we as hubs will do more research documenting the crop losses and economic impacts from climate change and vulnerability. So a challenge to us to help document those economic impacts. We all know people are feeling. We're not very good at measuring them yet, but progress to be made.
Now,
is that the next climate change indicator? So we have to deal
with? That is
with?
the ultimate, perhaps the ultimate.
Well, this
Good
is
job,
Anna.
Everybody.
I think you guys did an excellent job. I'm going to close it down and enjoy the rest of the conference. Thank you.
Thank you.